Hi, my name is Anna Goodwin, and I'm the director here at the History Museum of Hood River County. For more than a decade, we've shared the stories of personalities important to the history of our area. And last year, we took our live performance virtual. The great thing about presenting these stories in film is that we can highlight the diversity of people who have called the Hood River Valley their home and delve deeper into their stories. So we're back this year with the same format, bringing history to life once again. Before we begin, we must acknowledge our place on this land. Land acknowledgement is a traditional custom that dates back centuries in many Native nations and communities. The Columbia River Gorge in which we live is the ancestral homeland of many indigenous peoples, including the Nichiwana, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Solilo Wyam, Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation, Umatilla, and Nimipu. We thank the descendants of these tribes for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands. We acknowledge the many wrongs that we have done to them and celebrate their resilience and perseverance. We encourage you, the viewer, to learn about the land on which you reside and to join us in advocating for the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous people.
Native Americans have lived, prayed, and made music for more than 10,000 years in the Columbia River Gorge. Music's also been important aboard working ships, both in the military and in commercial endeavors. In ancient Egyptian drawings found in the tomb of Sheshem-Nefer at Giza, there's an image of a musician playing a clarinet-like instrument. The Vikings, Chinese, and Greek mariners from centuries ago all used musicians aboard their vessels to keep the beat for oarsmen and to rally their crews into battle. The songs that were sung aboard 18th and 19th century sailing ships might even be songs you've heard before, from sea shanties to ballads that tell a story. Sea shanties are work songs, used to coordinate sailors working in unison to get a job done, so it's not a stretch to imagine the crew of the Columbia Rediviva bringing their own types of music with them into the gorge in 1792. The journals of the Lewis and Clark expedition contain references to some 30 occasions when the men turned to song and dance for their own recreation, or to entertain and impress the native people they met along their journey. By the 1850s, when European and American settlers were moving into the Hood River area, music was a staple in nearly everyone's life the world over. Settlers of those times could not put on a record or tune in on their phones to listen to the symphonies of Mozart, Beethoven, or Liszt, but chances are they were playing fiddles and mouth harps, both of which the Lewis and Clark expedition carried with them, and singing popular songs of the era by composers like Stephen Foster. There's no arguing that music plays a very important and vital role in the lives of many people. It's pretty easy to say all of us. According to some archaeologists, music came into existence over 55,000 years ago. Even the sweet buzz of the hummingbird, the rhythm of frogs near a marsh, the rat-a-tat-tat of a woodpecker, the sound of air and rivers and sea waves remind us that nature's song may be the origin of music. It is a way of communication, prayer, and entertainment. It's been described as the universal language of humanity. It has the power to bring mood-changing positivity or introspection into our lives. Maybe most importantly, music has the power to bring us together.
My wild Irish rose, the dearest flower that grows. And someday
Our story starts around the turn of the 20th century, about 1904, with Harry DeWitt and Malty Dukes, part of a barbershop quartet that was very popular in Hood River. Hello, gentlemen. Would you please introduce yourselves to us?
I'm Henry Maltimore Dukes, but everyone called me Malty. I was born in Centralia, Illinois, on February 27, 1877, to John Henry Dukes and Ursula C. Maltimore.
Your father had been previously married to Rhoda Mabel Casey, but she passed away in 1873.
Yes, but after he remarried, my father had 4 children, me, Helen, Herman, and Macy.
And I'm Harry Talmadge DeWitt. I was born May 21st, 1880 in Ada, Ohio to David Albert DeWitt and Mary E. George. I had 5 siblings, Gladys, Ora, Charles, William, and Dora.
There's something you have in common. Roots in Ohio. Malta, your mother was born there, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Looks like you guys were really great friends.
Yeah, it sure was great to have a pal like Malty.
As I mentioned, you both lived during the turn of the 20th century. That was a time of lots of big changes in the US and the world.
Yep. Phonograph, radio, automobiles, and airplanes.
A time of booming growth.
Teddy Roosevelt was president, and the United States had been settled from coast to coast.
By 1900, telephones were everywhere. Cities were being electrified, moving pictures were being produced.
Henry Ford started his first car company in 1903. You certainly took advantage of that when you brought them to Hood River to sell, but we'll get to that later. Anything else stand out for you about the turn of the century?
Well, yeah. Although the invention of the record player was in 1878 by Thomas Edison, the vinyl was invented in 1906. Great times.
We always joked about being recorded on a record someday.
Just the two of you?
No, with our group, the Pastime Quartet. Me, Malty, Charles Black, and Ed Dunbar.
Barbershop music was inspired by the tradition of quartet singing among young Irish and African American men who gathered informally to crack up a chord. It's said that Louis Armstrong harmonized on New Orleans street corners as a boy.
I never knew that. Local barbershops were places where men like us could gather for social and musical activities. We sang standards like Shine On, Harvest Moon, Hello My Baby, and Sweet Adeline.
The barbershop quartet genre gradually faded into obscurity in the 1920s, but it saw an amazing revival in the 1940s. This is the two of you from 1904.
That was not long after I moved to Hood River from Portland. My first job in Hood River was as assistant bookkeeper at Davenport Brothers Lumber Company. I also worked for Mount Hood Lumber Company, which was newly formed when the Oregon Lumber Company bought out the old Lost Lake Lumber Company. This was also where I met my wife, Georgiana Florence Baker. I called her Pansy. We married on September 24th, 1905.
You and I, we met soon after that, when her poor brother Kenneth drowned in the slough below the train depot.
He fell from a horse while driving some cows. You were one of the first ones to jump into those cold waters after him. I'll never be able to thank you enough for that.
Well, it was the right thing to do.
There was a write-up in the paper over that. In fact, you both made the papers many times. Malty, you were often in the news because of your, what would you call them, adventures?
Yeah, I guess. My first big adventure turned out to be kind of a disappointment, though. It was when I joined the Oregon Volunteers during the war in the Philippines.
We refer to it as the Spanish-American War, which took place in Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. It's probably most well known because of Teddy Roosevelt's charge up San Juan Hill in Cuba.
We were in the Philippines fighting against insurrectionists. We started out with a simple-hearted and patriotic ideal, but ultimately we came to understand the futility of war.
The state of Oregon furnished 1 regiment of infantry, 2 batteries of light artillery, and 1 company of engineers, 1,352 men, including 56 officers. Average age, 25.
I was barely in my 20s. Our regiment was the first to land in the Philippines, the first to enter the walled city of Manila, and the first to return to the United States. But we mostly served as provost guard in Manila.
I remember some of that. After you enlisted, you went off to Camp McKinley in Portland.
That's right. And after only a few weeks, we caught a train down to San Francisco, and then a ship for Hawaii.
The Philippine Volunteers were the first armed expedition in U.S. history to travel 6,700 miles by sea for the sole purpose of conquering and occupying foreign soil.
It was a pretty heady time.
What was it like leaving Portland on such a journey?
Boy, it seemed like thousands of folks were out there on the avenues and on the bridges. They were leaning from windows and rooftops. Some were hanging from tree limbs and lampposts as we marched away to the war. It was quite a spectacle.
It was reported that on Sunday, May 15th, 20,000 people, a quarter of the city's population, was at the camp, caught up in the patriotic fervor.
After we got to San Francisco, we were crowded like pigs in a pen onto a ship for a 7-day voyage to Hawaii. But that was nothing compared to the boredom, bad food, and crowded conditions during the 26-day sail to Manila. And then there was more of the same in the Philippines. Up at 4 a.m. to drill because it was too hot or too rainy all day to do anything. Day after day, we laid around the barracks. The weather was hot. Most of the boys were sick with dysentery. Everybody shirked their share of work.
On August 12, 1898, 113 days after war was declared, a peace protocol was signed that ended all hostilities between Spain and the United States.
But that wasn't the end of our war. We thought we'd be sent home, but instead we ended up on guard duty while the Spanish troops came into Manila to surrender. I mean, we were always ready for action, and some skirmishes did take place, but we did a whole lot of nothing, most of the time.
And it looks like you were finally sent home and discharged on August 7th, 1899, almost 4 months after the war officially ended.
Yeah, they offered a $500 bonus to those willing to re-enlist, but it's hard to imagine why anyone would want to remain in the Army for 2 more years. I was certainly disillusioned when the glamour of combat did not materialize, and the dreary restrictions of Army life became a reality. I do think I learned a lot about humanity and the strength of character. Army life drew me and my buddies closer together. It's something I will never forget.
Not long after you returned to Oregon, you went to school at Oregon Agricultural College, which we now know as Oregon State University.
Yes, many of us returning from the Philippines attended the school there. I was a band major in the cadet band. I also held a sergeantship in the college cadet battalion, a promotion not many students in their first year at college received, probably due to my experience in the war.
We met around that time here in Hood River.
Not long after that, I married Mabel Gladys Cockrell in 1906.
Yeah, and then before long you were off to Portland. I really miss singing with you.
I know, I miss singing together too, but I had a good job there. I was a crane operator for Willamette Iron and Steel. Mabel and I had 4 children, Richard, Helen, Dorothy, and Marion. I had to consider them and earn a good living.
You were well loved in the community and certainly missed.
It's very apparent you had a lot of friends. Many of them were willing to come to your aid when you had a bit of a run-in with the law in Portland.
You mean that time he made the papers putting a dynamite bomb on the streetcar track?
Yes, the headline was Malty Dukes Exonerated, but it sounds like you were a bit of a scamp.
It wasn't a dynamite bomb. As I was leaving work and heading over to my boarding house on Albina, I found a small signaling torpedo lying in the street. I picked it up and put it on the track, thinking it would be fun to hear the pop. You know, the kind they use to signal trains. It wasn't that big, and I didn't really think it could damage or wreck a car.
It says here that a big burly policeman caught you in the act and sprang forward to slap the cuffs on you.
Well, I don't know how much springing that old slowpoke did.
Caught you, didn't he?
When the case came up in court, the judge banged his gavel. Case dismissed. Nothing to it.
And we all rejoiced with Mr. and Mrs. Dukes in the fact that their beloved son was exonerated. Lucky you that you have a host of friends, including me from Hood River, who are willing to spring to your defense if the need arise.
Well, Harry, you made the papers a bit as well, mostly for your businesses and the advertising you created to back it. You were kind of a big deal. And as I mentioned earlier, you brought Ford cars to Hood River.
Oh, it was nothing. I was one of the first automobile dealers in Hood River. We sold Hudson, Chrysler, Nash, Dodge, Ford, and Buick. We actually started in 1907 selling the Oldsmobile line.
In 1916, when you had the Gilbert and DeWitt car garage, you also had a sideline selling Orchard brand spray materials.
Orchardists couldn't do business without them. Bordeaux mixture, dormant soluble oil, arsenate of lead, atomic sulfur, for use against insects and disease.
A national publication, the Horseless Age magazine, reported in 1917 on the merger of Hood River Garage Company and Gilbert and DeWitt.
When Mr. Wiedemeyer retired,
Cars got to be a big business. By 1919, auto dealers in Hood River had sold 150 cars, but it was reported that popular makes of cars were far oversold.
but we delivered. Eventually. In 1919, I ordered 72 cars, and I already had cash deposit for 17 more. I actually had to go to Portland to secure more cars.
In 1908, you were the first to file a property deed just after Hood River County was formed, separating from Wasco County. You were quite involved in the community, a life member of the Elks Lodge and Masons, toll collector on the bridge, the county's first notary, city councilman for 2 terms, chairman of the local welfare commission. You dabbled in real estate, and you were even a baseball player.
Yeah, I played center field, right field. I was also umpire, and I loved tennis.
Yes, and in 1918, he won Northwest doubles and singles titles in Portland. But you know, he may be best known for bringing the first Frigidaire refrigerator into the valley.
In 1918, you built a new garage at 215 Cascade, where the Columbia Center for the Arts now sits. And in 1920, you built a new garage at 107 Oak Street. Why build so often?
To expand. Cars were the way of the future. There were just some unsightly shacks there, so we made a deal. The new building covered an area 100 feet by 100 feet, consisting of 1 story and a basement.
Now, didn't Malcolm Button become the sales manager there? The one they named the Hood River to Bingen Bridge after? And wasn't he also a trombone player?
He sure was. Yeah, they used to call it Button Bridge, but you'll find Button Bridge Road as you go south from that bridge. I loved that location, but during the 1930s, because of the Depression, sales slowed a lot, so we divided up the building and used part of it as a Greyhound station and the other part as a grocery store.
Andrew's Pizza is in that building now. There's still evidence of the old garage in there today. Just ask Andrew, the owner, about it sometime.
I saw a lot of changes over the years. I'm grateful for a very long and wonderful life.
Harry died July 22nd, 1971 in Hood River at 91 years old. Malty had passed long before that on August 8th, 1927 in Portland.
I grew up with music all around me. You know, the radio was a very big deal in the 1930s when I was a child. And of course, we had records around the house. My family was so very, very musical. You know, music was the driving force in my life. My love of music was intrinsic from the start, and it stayed with me until the day I passed away in 2004. Mr. Serpo said I was born to teach music. Well, I don't know about that. There were difficult times, but I never quit. In fact, I never quit at anything I set out to do. I just don't believe in the words I can't. I mean, I always said, if you want to do something, do it. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Oh dear, I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry.
Indeed you are. How about we start with your name, when you were born, and a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Dorothy McCormick, and I was born in Hood River, Oregon on January 7th, 1929. My parents were Oscar and Hilda Lindgren, and both of them have Finnish ancestry. I began playing the violin when I was 7 years old, and when I was 10, I played in the San Francisco World's Fair. At first, I started learning the violin from a traveling teacher who came around to Hood River, but that changed when Boris Serpo came to town. He's the one I mentioned earlier. I was also the creator and conductor of the Mid-Columbia Sinfonietta starting in 1978. I was a wife, a mother, a dancer, and a violinist.
Boris Serpo was a violinist, teacher, composer, and conductor. He was the founder of the Portland Chamber Orchestra, which he directed for 20 years. He also taught stringed instruments at Marahurst College and Lewis and Clark College. Mr. Serpo inspired and directed the Hood River Music Festival, led the Little Chamber Orchestra of Portland on 2 European tours, and gave private violin lessons in Portland and Hood River.
I began to take violin lessons from Mr. Serpo when I was 13. I think it was 1942. And I also played in the junior orchestra that he started. And later, I was the concertmaster for the senior orchestra, the Hood River Symphony. And by the way, some background on Mr. Serpo. His name originally was Boris Ossipovich Kaufman. He was born in Russia. And somewhere in the 1930s, he decided to change his surname to Serpo, but I think because it just sounded more Finnish. Mr. Serpo was a protege of the composer Sibelius.
The Soviet invasion of Finland in 1939 destroyed the conservatory while Mr. Serpo was touring with his wife Greta and their adopted son, prodigy violinist Heimo Hedo. The three refugees fled Europe, reaching New York in 1940 and eventually moving to Portland in 1941. Finnish friends in Hood River invited him to teach stringed instruments here, and that's when he established the Hood River Music Association. The association sponsored a children's choir and orchestra, whose members were Serpo students, as well as an adult choir and orchestra, the Hood River Symphony. He directed numerous concerts and summer festivals in Hood River. In 1945, he joined the faculty at Lewis and Clark College.
You know, as a child, I was considered a bit of a prodigy myself. I loved playing the violin, of course, and then I decided I wanted to take dance lessons. I was able to take ballet and tap dance. And you won't believe this, but when I was a little girl, I won a Shirley Temple tap dance. No, it was a Shirley Temple look-alike tap dance contest. And you know what else? I could play the violin and tap dance at the same time.
You were also a drum major and a cheerleader at Hood River High School.
I think the event I'm most proud of from high school was the night that I played Brooks' Violin Concerto my senior year with the Hood River Symphony. That was a magical evening. I attended Lewis and Clark College in Portland so that I could continue my studies with Mr. Serpo. I didn't finish college, though. It was much too expensive.
And you were married. Will you please tell us a little about your family?
Oh, yes, of course. Well, when I was 20 in 1949, I came back to Hood River and I married my high school sweetheart, James McCormick. He was a real Irishman. He had fiery red hair and lots of freckles. Everybody called him Brick.
It was after starting your family that you had to give up playing professionally, correct?
Well, yes, I did. But, you know, I did continue to teach music lessons. You know, my philosophy was never give up. And I wasn't about to give up music at all.
Let's talk a little about your grandfather, John. He came on a boat to America from Finland as a teenager in the 1880s after famine took its toll on his family.
Yes, that is correct. He was an indentured servant in Sweden, and so when he came to the United States, he didn't have any money. He moved to the Dakota Territory and he became a wheat farmer. And you know, life was really hard in those days. My father told us stories about riding in a wagon from Dakota all the way to Montana Territory so that they could work in the coal mines in the winter to make some money. And you know, they lived in a tent? And then, in the summer, they'd go all the way back to Dakota. It was a rough life, growing wheat. But my parents moved west to Odell. I think it was in the 1900s, early on, when the homesteads opened up. We grew pears, cherries, apples. We raised a few cows, and of course, music. Music and dances were always part of the mix. We used to hold dances at our packing house in Odell. And my sister Viola played the piano at the dances. That's kind of funny, right? Viola played the piano.
Boris Serpo dreamed of turning Hood River into the Salzburg of America. The Hood River Music Association put on the Hood River Music Festival twice. Each time, it was a 4-day event. The first was held in 1948, and the second was in 1951, and featured Hood River's Senior Symphony Orchestra, Junior Orchestra, Senior and Junior Chorus, all conducted by Serpo. The August 1951 festival contained the premiere of the opera, Bridge of the Gods, based on the Frederick Homer Balk novel written while he was living in Hood River. It was composed by William Schroeder of New York, who came to see the performance, and starred Nicola Moscana of the Metropolitan Opera and tenor Robert Hoffman. Soprano Catherine Oakes was the female lead. A concert in tribute to Sibelius opened the festival, and the Hungarian String Quartet performed.
Yes, that was quite the event. It was the talk of the town. And you know, Catherine Oates had come to an earlier festival. She was so taken with the Hood River Valley that she moved here and decided to teach French at the Y East High School. And you know, I also remember during that music festival, Mr. Serpo got heat stroke. He was quite sick, and soon after that, he stopped coming to Hood River. I'm not sure why. Some people said there was a contract dispute, but in any event, Clayton Hare became our next conductor. He was the head of music at the University of Portland at the time.
Let's talk about your home in Hood River.
Well, to begin with, we lived in D for a year. We lived in a company house right on the side of the railroad tracks. You know, my husband worked at the hardboard plant. And at that time, people used to heat their homes with sawdust from the D mill. A lot of the houses in Hood River were heated the same way, just burn the sawdust in the furnace. And then after D, that's when we built a house on Avalon Way in Hood River. And we lived there until our daughters, Patty and Karen, graduated from high school.
Your husband, James,
Ooh, oh, you mean Brick.
Brick, was a musician too, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. Brick was a fine guitarist. He had an original Les Paul electric guitar. He played in dance bands all around the area with Carl Clement. Carl had the music store up in the Heights in Hood River. Oh, and you know, Brick also played minor league baseball with the Portland Beavers. He was rambunctious, that guy. Next then, we moved to Salem. Brick bought a tavern there. I'm pretty sure it was so that he had a place to play music. From Salem, we went to Portland, and we lived in the St. John's Bridge area. Brick had some money from his family, and so he used it to invest in a furniture store.
Did you help out at the furniture store?
Oh, no, I didn't. I continued to take in music students. I had a chance to spread my wings a little bit because I rented a studio in downtown Portland near the college. And there was this one day I remember I was in a rush to get to a music lesson on time, so I just closed the car door and ran into the studio. Well, when I got back, my violin and all my scores had been stolen. Someone had broken into my car. Luckily, I still had the papers for my violin, so I called around to the pawn shops. And sure enough, somebody had pawned it. I did get my violin back. Of course, I had to pay the pawn shop, but I got it back. I never recovered my scores. I don't know, the thief probably just threw them away.
Then you became the concertmaster for the Chamber Music Society of Oregon Orchestra and conducted 4 youth orchestras for different levels of students. The Chamber Music Society also had summer camps at which you conducted and taught.
Yes, I really liked the summer camps. One summer, we had a camp orchestra that was for all ages. Just imagine grandmothers sharing music stands with 8-year-olds. It was so much fun. But you know what? In those days, many people believed that a woman couldn't be a conductor.
Is it true that in the Portland Symphony Orchestra, women had to dress like men and sit on the inside of the music stand and turn pages?
Yes, that was true. They said women couldn't do the same things as men. I said, why not?
And you showed them. In 1978, you started the Mid-Columbia Sinfonietta.
Yes, I cared so much about the music, and seeing that it continued, it never dawned on me that women weren't expected to conduct. I mean, it was never in my mind to say to somebody, I'm a woman and I can do it. No, I just thought somebody had to keep the orchestra going. I mean, it was such an important part of our lives. So I used to drive the highway from Portland to Hood River for rehearsals. We drove in all kinds of weather. Some nights it was so rainy or even snowing, we had to roll down the windows so someone could watch the side of the road to make sure we didn't drive right into the river.
Were your daughters musicians as well?
My daughter Karen played the French horn with the Tucson Symphony. Oh, and Karen is the only person I know who won a Fulbright scholarship to study mime at a school in Switzerland.
She clearly learned a thing or two. Karen appeared with Arthur Fiedler's Boston Pops Orchestra as a dancer and comedian.
And Karen went on to conduct the North Oregon Coast Symphony,
Which she did until 2016.
My older daughter, Patty, plays the flute, and she's a wonderful, gentle soul. And she became a bookkeeping wizard. Oh, and Patty's the mother of 2 girls. My granddaughter, Crystal, plays the violin in an orchestra now. She's the one that's keeping our family's musical tradition alive. So proud of her. For several summers, Patty and I played with Karen in Astoria and Cannon Beach. And one time, it was a Pops concert, and we played the piece Bows on Fire. Well, we had an old bow. We set it on fire off stage, and I ran across the stage with a flaming bow. It was so much fun. I always enjoyed playing music. You know, I memorized almost all the major concertos. When someone asked me to play, I usually didn't have to get the music out. I was just able to play it.
And it's tragic that it had to come to an end. On October 17th, 2004, Dorothy suffered a stroke on stage while conducting the Mid-Columbia Junior Orchestra at the Fruit and Craft Show at the Hood River County Fairgrounds.
We were playing Corelli's Fugue and Vivace. I became disoriented and I had to sit down. Before long, I was taken to a hospital in Portland.
Dorothy never recovered. This dear, tough, and caring woman passed away November 15th, 2004 at 75 years of age. At her funeral, a large group of violinists, students, former students, Sinfonietta members, and friends played the Finlandia hymn by Sibelius. It had been a tradition for Dorothy to play Finlandia at funerals in Hood River, and now it was her turn to be honored with this hymn. Her daughter Karen led the violinists at Dorothy's funeral. Dorothy McCormick is the principal reason there are performing orchestras in the Gorge today. Her years of devotion to the Sinfonietta and the Junior Orchestra paved the way for orchestral music to endure in the Columbia Gorge area. She created a foundation from which music in the Gorge could grow. And now, to introduce an acquaintance of Dorothy's, would you please introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Edith Kilbuck. I was born March 27th, 1931, on my father's farm in Pine Grove, near Hood River.
Were your parents native Oregonians? Tell us about your family.
Oh, I'd love to. I'm quite proud of my family history. At least I find it quite fascinating. You see, the Kilbucks are descended from Chief Galalemond of the Delaware tribe of what is now northeastern United States. Well, Galalemond, also known as Kilbuck, was a signer of the first American Indian Treaty with the U.S. government in 1778. Galalemond's great-grandson, John H. Kilbuck, was my grandfather, and he became the first person of the Delaware Nation to be ordained as a minister in the Moravian Church.
The Moravian Church.
Yes, it is one of the oldest Protestant denominations in Christianity, originating in Bohemia in the 15th century, 100 years before the establishment of the Anglican Church. Moravians first came to America during the colonial period, establishing a permanent presence in Pennsylvania by the 1740s, Specifically, they lived along the Lehigh River, which would have been in Delaware tribal territory.
So your grandfather was likely converted by Moravian settlers?
And after ordination, he too became a missionary. He spent his life in southwestern Alaska, where he and his wife, my namesake Edith, became an integral part of the indigenous community. In fact, their diaries provide much of what is known of Yupik life in the late 1800s. The Yupik are indigenous Arctic people, common ancestors of the Eskimo and the Aleuts.
Isn't there a Killbuck mountain range in southwestern Alaska?
Named for my grandfather in 1898. Apparently, he helped the U.S. geological surveyors with the geography and ethnology of the area.
So how did your parents come to Oregon?
My father, Joseph, was born and raised in Bethel, Alaska, but his parents sent him to the States for school. Remember, Alaska was not yet a part of the U.S. Well, he met my mother in high school in Kansas, though they didn't marry right away. They went their separate ways for college. Mother earned a home economics degree from Kansas State and then taught at 3 different universities. And father, after working in Alaskan gold mines to earn money for college, graduated with an agriculture degree from Washington State.
Sounds like they were hardworking and valued a good education. How'd they end up in Hood River?
Father swapped his Kansas wheat farm for the Pine Grove farm in the 1920s. He came to the Hood River Valley, planted 10 acres of cherries, his pride and joy. Well, after his children, I'm sure.
You had siblings?
Yes, 4 sisters and a brother. Father had married another Kansas girl, but she died of pneumonia at the age of 34, leaving him with 4 young children, my future siblings. He married my mother Emma 2 years later, and my sister Helen and I were born into the family.
What was your childhood like on the farm?
I didn't spend much of my life on the farm. About a year after I was born, tragedy hit the Hood River Valley. In 1932, heavy rains decimated Father's promising cherry crop. The mortgage was due, and unable to pay, our family was forced to leave the farm. In fact, over 150 farmers and orchardists lost their properties that year.
What did your family do?
We moved to town. The father began working for Hood River Apple Growers Association, which became Diamond Fruit, and he continued to work there until retirement.
And your mother, how did she manage during this time?
Well, even though my mother had taught at 3 universities before marriage, there were no teaching opportunities for her in Hood River. In order to contribute to the family's finances, she did housework for 15 to 20 cents an hour and, like many other women at the time, worked in fruit packing houses and canneries. All this while raising us 6 children. Eventually, Mother was offered a position to teach math at May Street School, where she remained for 13 years.
Your parents certainly were role models for hard work.
All the Killbuck children learned to work while very young, especially in those years after losing the farm. My older siblings had jobs like weeding gardens and mowing lawns, housework, strawberry picking, and of course, orchard work. My brother John got up at 3 a.m. to receive, distribute, and deliver the Oregonian newspaper.
Such early work habits paid off. All 6 of you graduated from Hood River High School with honors, is that right?
That is true, and we all earned college degrees. Several of us advanced degrees.
And you began playing piano at a very early age. You were a prodigy, I'm told.
I was very fortunate to have my family's support. They made many sacrifices so that my natural talent could be nurtured. My brother John's paper route, it financed my lessons, including my commutes into Portland.
You traveled to Portland alone as a young girl?
I suppose a young person wouldn't do that today, but yes, I took the Greyhound bus into Portland in order to study with David Beasley Campbell.
There's a recital hall named after him at the Community Music Center in Portland.
One and the same. He was a respected instructor and an accomplished pianist himself. I had such wonderful teachers and mentors. By the time I was a teenager, I was the pianist for Hood River Music Association's junior and adult orchestras under the direction of Boris Serpo. Remember him from Dorothy's Story? That's when I first met Dorothy.
We heard Mr. Serpo had a nickname for you.
Yes, he called me Edda, a name my family adopted and used at home, though it didn't stick.
Boris Serpo taught at Lewis and Clark, your alma mater.
It was a logical choice for me to attend Lewis and Clark, and I graduated in 1952 with a degree in piano. Then I had the wonderful opportunity to continue my studies at the Juilliard School of Music, where I earned a master's in piano and accompanying piano.
That must have been a big adjustment, moving from Oregon to New York City. How did your time at Juilliard influence you?
I was 21. It was wonderful being in such a dynamic and culturally rich place as New York and Juilliard. It was here that I was introduced to German and Austrian instructors who really nurtured my love for Viennese composers, both classical and romantic. Haydn, Mozart, Schubert, Schumann.
New York was just the beginning of travel for you. You taught for a year in Miami, then returned to Portland where you were teaching at Lewis and Clark and Portland University, when in 1962 you became the first recipient of the Petrie Award for Foreign Music Study. Boris Serpo was one of the judges. That $2,500 in prize money allowed you to study in Vienna.
The Petrie Award provided an opportunity for both focus and diversification in my education and professional career. You see, after several years as teacher, performer, coach, and accompanist, I recognized the areas in which I wanted to concentrate my efforts. And to be free to do this additional work without the necessity of earning a living at the same time was a real privilege. Living in Vienna and traveling elsewhere in Europe provided such an immediate and first-hand experience of our cultural heritage. The general history, the music history, the German language and literature, painting, sculpture, architecture. I feel I took a giant step toward becoming truly educated during that year as a recipient of the Petrie Award.
While in Europe, you became an expert in German Baroque keyboard music.
I suppose you could say that, yes. I then returned to Lewis and Clark, where I would continue to teach and coach for 26 years. I also went on to perform and record, though not on the piano.
You switched to harpsichord. Why?
Chronic arthritis led me to switch from piano to harpsichord. It was just easier on my body. And by taking a sabbatical from teaching, I was able to complete my doctorate in harpsichord and music history at the University of Oregon in 1976. But I continued to teach and coach pianists and opera singers, especially on the Viennese and German composers.
1976 was also the year you performed and recorded J.S. Bach's complete works for violin and harpsichord, together with André Granat.
Yes, and in the 1970s, I also performed and coached at the Aspen Music Festival and the Eugene Summer Festival.
You also accomplished a musical journey of epic proportions when you performed Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier in its entirety in the late 1980s.
Over the course of 4 solo concerts I did, all 48 preludes and fugues.
The Oregonian's music critic at the time praised your remarkably brave approach to what is often referred to as the Old Testament of keyboard music.
Well, some described me as a fearless performer and a tough teacher. Maybe that's my Delaware tribe DNA? But I considered myself a caring mentor For 3 decades, I introduced students to the rigor and joy of classical music.
Your students described you as brilliant, demanding, even scary.
They always knew I cared. I could get at the crux of a problem, be it technical or artistic, usually by offering an encouraging, "Let's try this." I was pretty good at honing in on small things that produced big results.
6 years after you retired in 1995, Lewis and Clark honored you with their Distinguished Alumni Award.
I had some very dear friends at Lewis and Clark who warmly welcomed me into their homes and their families. I never married or had children of my own, but I enjoyed time with nieces and nephews and friends. I loved sharing my stories of travel, a good game of Scrabble, and my signature thank you gift, a red tin of Moravian cookies.
You spent your final years living at Markham House in Portland, where you treated fellow residents to music history and listening classes.
Yes, that allowed me to unleash my creativity in new and profound ways. All my life, I continued to learn and explore, even after I was no longer able to play.
Edith Kilbook died in Portland on March 23, 2008, just 4 days shy of her 77th birthday. Dorothy and Edith were affected by music and live performances in profound ways. They speak of how music has different impacts from joy to sadness, and how music can tell stories. One doesn't have to be a musician to love it or to be involved. Our next tale is about a Hood River resident who became the subject of a Portland jazz ensemble project that makes a powerful statement. Jazz is an inclusive art form that can tell the stories of many communities, not just the stories of the urban experience so often associated with the music. Further, the project allowed the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble to reach across conventional boundaries and participate in one of the most important conversations of our time, equality. And now I'd like to introduce our next guest. Will you please introduce and tell us a little about yourself?
Yes, my name is George Akiyama. I was born on November 14th, 1919, just a few miles south of Hood River in Oak Grove. I am the oldest son of Tomashichi and Itsu Akiyama, and I farm pears on my family orchard with my wife Ruth, and we have 2 sons, Gary and Wesley, who both went to college.
And what was it like for you growing up in Hood River?
Well, back then, Hood River was famous for apples, and the farmers needed workers. My mother and father came over from Japan, and they got a job clearing the fields. They used these big stump pullers to pull trees with a team of horses, and then they would blow up the stumps with dynamite and pick up all the roots by hand. It was hard, but it was good for when they got their own land, because back then, some of the Issei would take land as payment.
Issei is how first-generation Japanese immigrants refer to themselves, correct?
Yes, Issei is first generation, Nisei is second generation, Sansei is third generation. It's like counting, 1, 2, 3, each Nisan.
Thank you. And what did your mother do?
Pretty much the same thing as Dad, only a few feet over. I think when you're an immigrant, you all have to work together to get ahead. I mean, by the time we started going to school, we started working. Every free minute we had, we were working on the farm. We would plant asparagus and strawberries in between the rows so we could earn money while waiting for the apple and the pear seedlings to grow. My older sister Kyo and my younger brothers Sab, Nobi, and Henry, we all worked together hoeing and trimming pears in little clusters and making rills in the soil so the water could run down. And by the time we were in high school, no one was more excited than our parents for spring vacation, because then we could work all day. No school. Yeah, we didn't play with other kids or go anywhere. We just worked to help the family survive.
You also served in the Army during World War II?
Yes, I was drafted in November of 1941. See, we just wanted to fight for good old Uncle Sam. I was assigned to the 442nd Combat Regiment. We were known as the Go for Broke Battalion because these Hawaiian boys who were in the 100th, that was their term for giving it everything you got, go for broke. Yeah, we were in France trying to take this town called Bruyères, and the Germans were just shelling us. The worst were those German 88s. Most artillery, when they shoot it, it takes a few seconds for it to go up and land. But man, these 88s, they're like a rifle. They're straight. So it's like, boom! You don't have time to hide or anything. It's like, boom, bam! I mean, that's how fast it goes. So we get sent up to the Vosges Mountains to rescue these guys from the 1st Battalion, 141st Regiment from Texas. See, they had gotten cut off, and they were running out of food and ammunition, and no one could save these guys. So they sent us. Well, after being just pinned down for days, yeah, we just went for it. No orders or anything. These guys were called the Lost Battalion, but we found them. Yeah, we saved 211 of them, but we lost over 800.
The Lost Battalion Rescue is recorded in U.S. military history as one of the great ground battles of World War II. Thankful members of the 141st gave their rescuers a plaque that read, "With deep sincerity and utmost appreciation for the gallant fight to effect our rescue after we'd been isolated for 7 days." The Lost Battalion is just one entry, but only one, in the regiment's catalog of valor during World War II. For its size and time in combat, less than 2 years, the 442nd is the most decorated unit in U.S. military history. It also has the highest combat casualty rate of any regiment in the U.S. Army. Mr. Akiyama and the rest of the 442nd fought in 8 major campaigns in Italy, France, and Germany, including the battles at Monte Cassino, Anzio, and Bifontaine. They earned more than 18,000 individual decorations, including 1 Medal of Honor, 53 Distinguished Service Crosses, 588 awards of the Silver Star, 5,200 awards of the Bronze Star Medal, 9,486 Purple Hearts, and 7 Presidential Unit Citations, the nation's top award for combat units. Do you remember how you felt when you learned that your family back home was put into the Japanese internment camps?
Oh, that's a touchy subject. See, I used to keep in contact with my sister Kyo through letters. Many of the families wouldn't talk on the telephone because they were afraid of getting spied on. This was back when they had telephone exchanges, and then you could just listen to someone's conversation if you picked up the phone at the right time. Well, she wrote me and let me know that they had come and got my dad. They come and got all these issei, these men, these leaders of organizations. My dad was the head of the Hood River Issei Society. I guess they thought they were, spies or something, Actually, the Hood River Issei Society was just there to help each other out, because many of the men didn't understand English. Well, I thought, well, that's just the way it is, and you can't do much about it. But I was also really kind of angry. See, I was there in the Army, an American, defending America, and my family was back at home being treated like an enemy. There wasn't much I could do about it, though. I did visit them when I was on furlough at the Tule Lake concentration camp. We talked mostly about food. Basically anything that wasn't about the war or their imprisonment. I just wondered why there weren't camps like this for Germans or Italians living in America. It just wasn't right. At least when we were in Europe, you knew who the enemy was. They were the ones shooting at you. Well, back home, it hurt. It hurt to see old friends look away or pretend like they didn't see you when you were walking down the street. Or to see a store that had a sign that said, "No dogs, no Japs, and no Negroes." Most places wouldn't even sell us groceries or gas. But there were a few good ones. Good people like McIsaacs and Parkdale and Sandstrom's who owned the downtown Safeway. Garibrand's was the only place that would sell us gas. And Buckley's was our only drugstore. There was Moore's Electric and Fields Furniture, but that was about it.
And that relates to your haircut story.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know why everybody wants to talk about that. That was a long time ago, and things change.
I know it's uncomfortable for you to talk about it, but it happened, and it's important for our viewers to know what it was like at that time. There were witnesses, an Air Force Captain, Sheldon Lawrence, who saw the whole thing and then found out where you lived and came to express his support. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable. History's uncomfortable. But if people choose not to learn about it or whitewash it, then it's probably going to happen again to someone else. Think about all the terrible things that happened to the Issei and Nisei, but so few people know about them because it isn't taught, or some just want to pretend it didn't happen, or they just want to move on from it.
Well, this was back when I had just returned to Hood River. I went to the barber shop in my dress uniform with my purple heart and my bronze and silver stars. I am and still will always be proud of my service to this country. So I needed to look my best, and I waited to get my hair cut, and the barber walks up to me and says, "Hey, are you a Jap?" I said, "A Jap? I'm an American citizen." And, he comes up with his straight razor in his hand, and he says, "I ought to slit your throat."
What were you thinking at that moment?
Gaman. It's Japanese for persevere.
And you were wearing your full dress uniform?
Yes, but he didn't see that though. He just saw this. So I jump out of that chair, and as I'm leaving, I say, "Boy, you are worse than some of those Germans we fought." And I walked out. Sure, I was angry, but what's the use? So I did what I was taught to do. Don't complain too much. Do your best, and do what's best for your country. If you're gonna be a ditch digger, be the best digger out there. I always tell my sons, if you want to be respected, then you must be respectful. Gaman. Persevere.
Thank you, George. On August 13th, 2022, a 41-mile stretch of Highway 35 from Hood River to Mount Hood was formally designated as the Oregon Nisei Veterans World War II Memorial Highway. 433 Oregon second-generation Japanese Americans, or Nisei, served during World War II. At the same time, many of their families were incarcerated in American concentration camps. President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 in 1942 that led to the imprisonment of more than 120,000 people of Japanese descent, 2/3 born in the United States, under armed guard and behind barbed wire fences. The soldiers and their families faced discrimination and imprisonment during and after the war. Some local residents vowed to prevent returning Japanese Americans from resettling in the community, and many local businesses refused to serve them. In Hood River, 16 Nisei soldiers' names were blacked out from an honor roll of local service members on wall plaques at the county courthouse in 1944. They were restored 3 months later only because of pressure from the American Legion National Commander. An exhibit in the fall of 2022 at the History Museum of Hood River County examines the injustices that Japanese Americans from Hood River faced, with letters, photos, documents, and first-hand accounts from soldiers. We are including George Akiyama in this year's Cemetery Tales to honor the Nisei World War II veterans on the occasion of the dedication of the Oregon Nisei Veterans World War II Memorial Highway, Highway 35. And now I'd like to introduce a family who for a time went by the Schlitz family Fraunfelders, but their story is much bigger than that. Before and after the Schlitz contract, they were known as the Swiss family Fraunfelders.
I think many people around Hood River still remember us as a trio, although just prior to coming here, we were a quartet with our sister Ruthie. I played clarinet, Papa played bass, Ruthie was our pianist, and Betty...
I played the accordion. I remember those moonlit nights on Mount Hood at Tilly Jane Campground.
I loved those times on Mount Hood. It was the perfect venue for yodeling. We are the Swiss family Fraunfelders. My name is Reinhard Fraunfelder, and I was named after my father and have passed the name on to my son.
But people call me Rainey, and no one really knows you by any other name but Papa.
Well, that is true.
And I'm Elizabeth, but everyone calls me Betty.
You were named after your grandmother, Elizabeth Seeberger, your mother's mother. I married your mama Frida on June 14th, 1918.
Our family was big, 6 children. Rainey, me, Ruthie, Hansi, Helen, and Fritz. 21 grandchildren and 16 great-grandchildren.
Papa was 93 when he died, and Mama was almost 101.
She was a perfect mother. She lived her whole life for us, her children. She was exceptionally generous to others as well. She gave away lots of vegetables from the family garden and knitted, she knitted a mile a minute.
When we came to this country, we became Americans.
But we were always the Swiss family Fraunfelders.
Yes, because we don't want to forget where we come from. Nearly every family in America comes from another place originally. Some stay connected to the roots and others not so much.
Enough, you two. We were talking about our music.
Your career lasted more than 3 decades, entertaining American soldiers, promoting Schlitz beer, advertising dairy products, even some work with Disney and the motion picture studios, performing live radio shows, singing for the Chautauqua Circuit, yodeling at state fairs, making records, appearing at Rotary and other civic clubs.
Yes, we were the only 4-part yodelers in America that sang melodies from Switzerland. But even though our Swiss roots go back to the 1600s, we considered ourselves Americans. We arrived in the United States on July 23rd, 1923, to our first home with some Swiss show business friends in Van Nuys, California. It was about the time of Hansi's birth that we owned a chicken ranch called Poor Man's Poultry Products Company on Orangewood Road near Anaheim, just blocks away from what would be Disneyland 25 years later. I gave up on that business when thieves stole all of my chickens.
That's awful. I can't imagine how that must have felt. Times were hard, it sounds like. And I think we're leaving out one more sibling, correct?
Yes, our youngest brother, Frederick, or Fritz, was born August 16th, 1934.
Today, Fritz is a prominent ophthalmologist known for his work with cancer of the eye. He's the author of many publications and books, and he's one of the founders of the KCI Institute at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland. Disney was mentioned earlier, but we got away from it. Will you tell us a little about your experiences with the Walt Disney Company?
Well, in the 1930s, the movies came looking for us because of yodeling.
In 1935, when I was 13 years old, I had a contract with Mickey Mouse Productions to provide sound effects for animation.
Which led to one of our biggest headaches. In 1938, we sued Disney for $50,000 for using our melodies without permission in their movie Snow White.
I was the yodeling coach for Snow White, but Disney never even acknowledged that either. I am still amazed that the judge who dismissed our suit against Disney said he could not tell one yodel from another. How could he not recognize...
Calm down, Papa. That was a long time ago.
It was about that time, 1939, when we joined the Chautauqua Circuit.
The Chautauqua Circuit was a series of community gatherings across the country where people would be entertained with a mixture of music by country fiddlers, opera companies, and yes, Swiss yodelers, as well as lectures on civic ideals, literary arts, and politics.
We were once on the same circuit as Eleanor Roosevelt.
At that time, we also made many appearances at concerts and dances sponsored by Swiss organizations along the West Coast.
What were your performances like? All yodeling?
Well, we also performed waltz and folk tunes from Switzerland and skits and sound films that Papa used to promote for the Swiss-based Red Cross.
During World War II, we did USO tours and had hundreds of performances at veterans' hospitals.
But your greatest fame came when you were under contract with Schlitz Brewing Company for more than 600 events, including television, radio, and personal appearances.
That's when we were known as the Schlitz family Fraunfelders. And times were good. We were living the American dream.
With a Swiss twist.
As you can see, Rainey was the comic relief in our act.
We did a steady business of performing at fairs and company picnics in the Wisconsin dairy region with many Swiss immigrants. I did a regular WTMJ radio program 3 times a week, sponsored by Schlitz.
The Schlitz advertising slogan at that time was, "Take it from Papa, Papa knows best." The ads mostly featured Papa striking a pose, but sometimes they also pictured the rest of the family.
In the 1940s and 50s, we made many recordings for Rondo Records.
The herd song, the milkmaid, the cuckoo waltz, the yodel polka.
But we will never be remembered for our pop hits. We did take a stab at popular songs with ties to the old country, and I also sang Edelweiss, which many people thought was an Austrian folk song, but it was actually exclusively written for the Sound of Music by Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Things changed for you when you moved to San Francisco in 1950, didn't they?
Yes, that was when Ruthie married Dick Buckley from Elm Grove, Wisconsin.
It was love at first yodel.
I kept discouraging my children from marrying. I knew it would break up the act.
But it didn't, Papa. Not much. We continued on as a trio after the move to Oregon.
And that happened in 1950 as well, correct?
Yep, we moved again to the Hood River Valley, to what was called the Tucker Hill District. Papa and Mama operated a fruit orchard that they called Melody Ranch. I started my own orchard business out on Tucker Road near the Hood River.
For those keeping track at home, that location later became Pheasant Valley Winery and is now the Hayu Wine Farm.
As a trio, we made appearances through the mid-50s, mostly in the Pacific Northwest.
That's when marriages probably did break up the group.
Yes, I married a state senator from Bickleton, Washington, Stanton Ganders, in November of 1954. We had 3 children, Larry, Linda, and Lisa.
And I was married on April 16th, 1955, to Annalise Mucke of Portland. We had 3 children, Ryan, or Booba, Erica, and Heidi, also known as Finky. Although we were still doing some performing as a trio, Betty was probably the best known of us in Hood River.
Betty moved to Spokane about 1960, but continued making solo appearances, performing for local television shows like the one hosted by cowboy singer Cliff Carl, and for charitable groups, public schools, nursing homes, county fairs. How Great Thou Art and May the Good Lord Bless and Keep You were popular requests at church services.
While I was singing in church, I could tell my son Larry was embarrassed because I really sang out. I often sang in Swiss German. Oh, and I carried a card in my wallet that showed I was an honorary deputy sheriff from Hood River County. I'm very proud of that.
Mama and Papa moved to Portland in the 1960s, where he turned his hobby of handwriting analysis into a bit of a business and continued to make music.
I taught that handwriting was brain writing. Changing handwriting could actually change characteristics of a person. Our home on Canyon Crest Drive in Portland, Oregon also became a music destination. Friends and family brought their instruments and gathered around me at my organ to sing and yodel. And yes, groups would gather for handwriting classes I taught in my living room.
Papa and Mama later moved closer to Betty in Spokane, Washington's Sans Souci subdivision in 1975, where they lived in a single-wide mobile home near the former Natatorium Park.
Quite a change from the mansions we lived in the past.
Mama and Papa moved to Woodburn, Oregon, and later Kaiser, Oregon. In August 1988, Papa died at the age of 93. A local newspaper wrote about Mama's 100th birthday in 1989. She died in 1990, 3 months before her 101st birthday.
I died in Salem on February 2nd, 2007.
I passed away December 8th in the year 2008, just a couple of weeks before my 87th birthday. My Stanton passed away in Olympia in 1990. Both of us are buried in Olympia.
It's not surprising that the beaten instruments that the Frauenfelders use is very similar to those of the musician to whom we next speak, Benigno Lopez. Music from the northern part of Mexico, norteño,
o música norteña, música del norte, fue influenciada por los colonos alemanes en Texas alrededor de 1830. No es casualidad que algunos tipos de música mexicana tengan la influencia de la polca alemana, un papa. Uno de los instrumentos musicales más influyentes del estilo musical de los alemanes, el acordeón, se hizo especialmente popular y se usó con frecuencia en la música de baile como valses y polcas. Un conjunto norteño presenta el acordeón junto con el bajo sexto, que es un instrumento mexicano similar a una guitarra de 12 cuerdas. La popularidad de la música norteña entre los mexicoamericanos se extendió en la década de 1950 y se superpuso con los estilos populares estadounidenses de rock and roll y swing. Esta superposición de estilos musicales se conoció como tejano, literalmente la palabra en español para una persona tejana, o más apropiadamente Tex-Mex, una mezcla de las dos culturas. Con el tiempo, el norteño se mezcló con otros estilos musicales para formar estilos musicales únicos, incluyendo la quebradita, que es un estilo que está compuesto en su mayoría por instrumentos de viento, la banda, un estilo similar a la polca, la ranchera, un género de música tradicional mexicana, y probablemente la forma más reconocible de la música mexicana, la música de mariachi de la región de Guadalajara. A lo que nos lleva a nuestro próximo invitado. ¿Podrías, por favor, presentarte?
Hola, soy Benigno López, pero todos me llaman Benny. Nací el 9 de mayo de 1937 en Cualcomán, Michoacán, México.
¿Cómo llegaste a interesarte por la música?
Mira, pues, comenzó con mi padre. Yo desde chiquillo escuchaba a mi papá tocar su violín. Conforme fuimos creciendo, nos enseñamos a tocar mis hermanos y yo. Después formamos un conjunto de arpa con mi papá y mis hermanos.
¿Qué es un conjunto de arpa?
Un mariachi pequeño de solo violines, vihuela y el arpa.
Entonces, ¿eran músicos profesionales?
Oh, no. Sembrábamos maíz y frijoles y cosas así. Fue difícil, pero hicimos el trabajo que nuestros padres nos enseñaron a hacer. Y lo pasábamos bien también. La música hizo sentir que éramos afortunados, a pesar del duro trabajo. Tocábamos de ranchos en ranchos, especialmente en las fiestas del pueblo.
¡Qué cambio!, ¿no? ¿Cómo fue tu viaje para llegar a Hood River?
Pues mira, toda la vida vivimos en Cualcomán. Mi madre fallece muy joven y fuimos 9 de familia. Después yo me casé en 1955 con Vicenta. En Michoacán nacieron 4 de mis hijos: Socorro, Juana, Javier y Antonia. Después nos fuimos a Colima, a un ranchito que se llamaba La Tunita. Ahí nació Rafael y Miguel y un hijo que se nos murió como a los 2 años.
¿Fue la música lo que te trajo a los Estados Unidos?
No, fue el trabajo y la pobreza. Yo me sabía venir a Texas en la temporada de la cosecha. Así lo hice por varios años. Me venía solo y dejaba a Vicenta con la familia en La Tunita.
Sin embargo, nunca mudaste a la familia a Texas. ¿Cuándo llegaste a vivir permanentemente en los Estados Unidos?
A Texas nunca nos venimos a vivir. Pero poco después mi hija Socorro, la mayor, se casa y yo no pude estar en su boda porque estaba en Texas todavía. Socorro y su esposo se vienen para los Estados Unidos. Meses después regreso a México y decidimos venirnos con ella. Llegamos a Sunnyside, Washington, como en el 76. Primero, y ahí nació mi hija María en el 77. Ahí me gustó mucho, pero después vinimos a Hood River a trabajar una temporada y a mi esposa y la familia les gustó bien mucho. Creo que casi al año nos movimos para Hood River. Allí nació mi hijo, el más chico, Jaime, en el 79. Al poco tiempo pudimos dejar el campo y conseguir trabajo en una fábrica de fibra de vidrio que se llamaba Western Power. Ahí fíjate que trabajé casi toda mi vida. Cerraron unos años después de que me jubilara en el 2000. En los fines de semana me juntaba con mis amigos músicos que había conocido en Hood River, y en los cumpleaños y fiestas locales tocábamos muy seguido. A mi hijo Javier también le gustaba la música. Él tocó el teclado y era parte del grupo local. Por él conocí a mi buen amigo Juan Antonio Martínez. Él había llegado de México también y él era maestro de música y tenía ganas de formar un grupo, un mini mariachi, decía él, local, y enseñar a los jóvenes.
Juan Antonio Martínez enseñó clases de mariachi en la Iglesia Católica de Santa María en Hood River a partir de 1988 y todavía enseña un programa gratuito después de la escuela para estudiantes de kindergarten al grado 12 en el distrito escolar del condado de Hood River. Es un programa apoyado por la comunidad que atrae a estudiantes de todo el distrito. Está financiado por el distrito escolar, Hood River Education Foundation, Arts and Education of the Gorge y Hood River Cultural Trust.
Se me hace muy bonito que en este pueblo de Hood River esté esta oportunidad de aprender música, especialmente para los niños y jóvenes. Estoy muy orgulloso de las tradiciones musicales que he podido compartir con mis hijos y nietos. Creo que me hace más feliz que cualquier otra cosa que haya hecho en mi vida.
Así que por favor, cuéntanos más sobre tu mini mariachi. ¿Era esta una forma de tocar música con tu familia?
Ah, sí. Sí, yo tocaba el violín, Juan Antonio tocaba la trompeta y guitarra y muchos otros instrumentos. Mi hijo Jaime tocaba el guitarrón. Los hermanos de Juan Antonio tocaban también con nosotros. Poco a poco mis nietos y nietas fueron aprendiendo la música. Es algo de lo que estoy muy orgulloso. Mis nietas más grandes tocaron con nosotros desde que eran pequeñas, diría como de 8 a 9 años. Mónica empezó a tocar la vihuela y Marta cantó con nosotros. Y quiero que sepan, no las empujé a cantar o a tocar. Mis hijas las mandaban a la escuela de la música con Juan Antonio y aprendieron a tocar y bailar, bailables. Una vez que llegué a Hood River, no toqué tanto. Tenía que trabajar y mis hijos más pequeños no estaban interesados en tocar mariachi. Aún así, tocamos aquí y allá, nada profesional, pero creo que así es como mis nietos se interesaron en formar su propio grupo. Yo pienso. Juan Antonio fue una gran influencia en ellos. Es como parte de la familia. En los 90s viajábamos por Oregon y Washington para tocar como el 5 de mayo, en las escuelas y en muchas fiestas mexicanas y también muchos cumpleaños de familiares. Y fíjate, tengo una historia chistosa que me gustaría contarles. Una vez íbamos a una tocada y íbamos en una van que no tenía asientos y pues ahí nos sentábamos cada quien como podía. Habían unas sillas sueltas y pues me tocó yo en una de esas, iba sentado y Juan le pisó al acelerador y le dio gas y me voy para atrás y caigo en el guitarrón. ¿Te imaginas? El guitarrón se quebra en muchos pedazos y yo estaba bien triste y pues porque imagínate, ¿no? El guitarrón es el bajo y pues sin el bajo, sin guitarrón no íbamos a poder hacer la tocada. Mis nietas se carcajeaban pero yo por dentro estaba yo muy triste porque pues sin el guitarrón, ¿qué íbamos a hacer? Después el maestro Juan Antonio, él pegó ese guitarrón con todo esfuerzo, lo pegó y el guitarrón lo seguimos usando ya. Después lo usamos y yo estaba impresionado de que todos los pedacitos los puso y era como un arte.
¿No es inusual que niñas o mujeres formen parte de estas bandas?
Ya no, pero sí, cuando yo estaba creciendo no se miraba tanto que las mujeres formaban parte del mariachi. Creo que a mis hijas Socorro y Antonia les hubiera encantado cantar con nosotros cuando ellas eran jóvenes. Ahora mis nietas son una gran parte de nuestra tradición de música.
Las personas de herencia mexicana no siempre son tratadas con respeto. Debe ser una lucha enfrentar eso diariamente. Algunos de los jóvenes deben alejarse de las viejas formas al tratar de pertenecer.
Mira, en los tiempos de antes era difícil sentir sentimiento mexicano aquí en Hood River. Pero la música la traigo en la sangre y por eso seguimos tocando música. Lo que tú dijiste puede ser la razón por la que mis hijos más chicos no querían ser músicos. Probablemente solo había unos cuantos niños mexicanos en su escuela.
¿Los miembros de su familia pudieron venir a Estados Unidos a través de medios legales?
Fíjate que no. Muchos de nosotros habíamos llegado a los Estados Unidos sin papeles. Pero hubo una amnistía en el 84, 85. Y muchos de nosotros tuvimos la suerte de obtener nuestros documentos y residencias. Jaime y María nacieron en los Estados Unidos y estoy muy orgulloso de mis nietos. Ellos les encanta la música y son orgullosos de sus raíces. Y también todos mis hijos porque ellos batallaron mucho al tenerse que acoplar a otra cultura cuando eran niños.
Cuéntanos sobre tus nietos y sus logros musicales.
Mira, estoy muy orgulloso de todos ellos. Incluso les ayudé a construir un estudio de música aquí en la casa. Le dicen ellos el cuartito. En 1997 empezaron a practicar y grabaron. Estoy muy orgulloso de ellos. Estuvieron ocupados tocando música muchos de los fines de semana durante 20 años, también después de que me hubiera ido. Mi hijo Jaime nació alrededor del mismo tiempo de mis nietas, por lo que se unió a sus sobrinas y sobrinos y formaron el grupo Antifaz, un conjunto norteño que también incluyeron el violín. Jaime tocaba la batería, Javier los teclados, Patti el acordeón y la percusión, Franco el bajo, Felipe el teclado y Julio el violín y la guitarra. Mis nietas Mónica y Marta, que tocaban con nosotros en el mariachi, también estuvieron con el grupo Antifaz. Una generación más joven de músicos siguen con mi legado. Son mis nietos. Se llaman los nietos de Benny. ¿Qué tal? Lleva mi nombre. Tocan una de mis canciones favoritas, La Venadita, y Ya viene amaneciendo. Y en su nuevo video musical honran algo que realmente amo. Mis animales, mis gallos.
No estaba segura de que los gallos fueran algo de lo que se nos permitiera hablar.
¿Por qué no? Tenía gallos y gallinas por toda mi casa. Era mis animales favoritos. No es ningún secreto que morí en Odell cargando uno de mis gallos en mis brazos. Yo sé que pelear gallos es ilegal aquí en los Estados Unidos, pero es una larga y honrada tradición de donde yo vengo.
Te han descrito como muy respetado y fácil de bromear contigo, que te encantaba bailar, festejar y siempre estabas muy alegre.
Es cierto, amo a mi familia y cantamos, tocamos, agarrábamos un instrumento y a tocar. Estoy triste que no hayamos tenido la oportunidad de sentarnos y hablar sobre lo orgulloso que estoy de ellos. Debería haberlo dicho más. Venimos a Oregon porque queríamos darle a nuestros hijos una vida mejor. Amamos este país y aunque nos ha costado, nos ha dado mucho.
Benigno López falleció el 12 de abril de 2003, entre amigos, pasándola bien. Tenía solo 65 años.
I hope you enjoyed the show and that you've come away with a new appreciation for our talented, unique community. I'd like to thank all of the people who helped to bring these tales to life. Director Joe Garut, scriptwriter Michael Friend, board chair Erica Roulet, and the entire amazing cast. We are also indebted to the families of the individuals portrayed. Thank you for entrusting your stories to us and sharing them with the community. And finally, our gratitude to the sponsors who provide support for this year's show. The History Museum holds the tangible record of our community's history in the form of archives, objects, and photos. They are preserved and interpreted for the enjoyment and education of generations to come. Please visit the museum, become a member, or get involved through volunteering. I hope to see you here soon.